Hello, welcome back. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for joining us in this Jumpstart course where we're looking at the move to hybrid cloud through System Center and Windows Azure. We've looked at a huge amount of System Center technology so far, from Service Manager and Orchestrator through to connecting that with Azure. We've looked at VMM and App Controller. We've looked at PowerShell, loads of cool stuff, and Pete's done some great demos so far as well. But in this session, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the Service Manager stuff and explain how that relates more to the hybrid cloud and what other cool scenarios we can drive out of that. So do you want to take control and push on through on the final home straight to close?
Pushing on to the top of the mountain. So if you weren't with us in part one, in day one, when we looked at all of this technology from through the lens of private cloud, much of what we were talking about there at the end of day one was really around taking all of your investments in building service templates and orchestrator runbooks to drive those service templates, then to surface those, to present those in the Service Manager self-service portal so we could control the user experience. I'm going to give you just a peek into that today to really just let you know that the same is possible for your Azure integrated runbooks. I can still tie the public cloud deployment experience back very close to my ITIL process. I can close the loop. I can use Service Manager's native notification and workflow capabilities to drive approval workflows to send emails to the right people in the process in terms of approving that work. I want to talk to you about the impact of Azure Infrastructure as a Service on lifecycle management, because as we're scaling out with that extra capacity, we need to make sure that we take care to keep some eyes on that additional cloud capacity we're provisioning and consuming there, so we don't get into a different kind of sprawl. Convenience, the fact that we can take a provisioning process that might have had a lengthy wait time in the past and turn that into a push-button operation makes it very easy for us without some process in place to grow a little beyond our original intention. So we'll look from a technical perspective, how we can take some of those assets that we see in Azure, maybe get those into the Service Manager database, into the CMDB, so we have a bit of visibility there. Talk about just bridging a couple of gaps that we've called out here and there throughout the day. So thinking about portal customization. This was a topic that came up in day one, and we didn't talk about it much, other than to say customization is limited. So I wanted to call that out today to just let you know we can in the Service Manager self-service portal change the corporate logo, change some colors and some fonts. We can add some links. That need help section, which comes at the top of the portal, can actually be updated. I've seen folks, and in the questions after the session yesterday, somebody asked, how do I get announcements onto the portal? There's a great example on one of my Premier Field colleagues' blogs. So I'm an MVP, but I work with some of the Premier Field guys in the community. And at contoso.se, my friend Anders has actually put a nice example together of how to drive announcements to that need help section on the portal. So we have limited customization. It's not absolute flexibility. I can't move widgets around to a completely different look and feel, I guess is the point I'm trying to make there.
But you can do colors and fonts.
You can do colors and fonts and your corporate logo, so we can make it feel like home, for sure.
It's all about marketing.
You got it. It's all about...
And it runs on SharePoint.
It runs on SharePoint. It runs on SharePoint Foundation, right?
Yep.
So important. It's not necessarily enterprise. This is that free version we download. It's there. It's part of Service Manager. We could leverage it for other purposes, like creating little dashboards, maybe publishing dashboards from Ops Manager over there.
Yeah, it could be.
I love to do that because people are always surprised that the free version lets me do that. Well, yeah, I'm taking a URL out of the Ops Manager web console and I'm just plugging it into a report viewer or page viewer control at that point, basically, more or less. So just to touch on role-based access. So we've talked about role-based access from a VMM perspective, from an app controller perspective, and how we, really VMM is our role-based access for app controller from a private cloud perspective. For the Azure side, we tied Azure back to Active Directory. Now, in Service Manager, anybody who logs into our portal should be able to open an incident. Authenticated users are going to have a capability to tell us about a problem. What they won't have out of the box is the ability to do anything with regards to service request offerings that we publish in the service catalog. So in case you weren't with us in day one of our Jumpstart, I want to take you through this relatively quickly. You're going to see this hands-on when we get into the demos in the UI. So after we've given a user role within Service Manager, we've created a role and granted them enough rights to be self-service users, we use a concept called catalog groups to expose or hide service offerings and request offerings within the service catalog. So the user is going to see the offerings based on their role and which catalog groups we have given them permission to see, which means that HR will see different offerings than IT and different offerings than finance, etc. So I can deal with that very granularly on a per group basis. Those roles are mapped back to Active Directory, which means when somebody wants permission to be a member of the finance self-service user role, that's somebody at our help desk at level 1 just adding a user to a group, set it, forget it. So that provisioning process is an inexpensive process. And it allows us, these catalog groups, provide access at the service offering level and the request offering level. Now we're going to sort out the difference between service offering and request offering in the UI, so we know what these catalog groups are actually doing at the end of the day. And our service catalog is basically going to be organized, it's organized hierarchically. So we'll see categories at the top, some nice big blue labels if we haven't changed the font. And you can control those through a simple text-based list. And then we will create collections of offerings that people can request. We call these service offerings. So for access and security, I might have offerings to allow people to request access to Active Directory groups, application servers, VDI, pooled desktop collections, and what have you. The individual request offerings are actually what the user clicks on to drive that activity. So this hierarchy is kind of a click-through sort of experience. They see the category, which points them to the kind of area where they want to look at the service offerings, and then they can click through the service offering to the request offering. So the verbiage that we put on these is going to be really important to make sure we use a strategy that helps our user navigate to the right offering. I can use whatever language I want. I can fill in the description fields. So I can take someone who is only quasi-technical. A common scenario is user onboarding with HR. HR administrators are really smart folks, but they're not IT folk. But we can give them an onboarding experience so they can plug in the information IT needs to drive that process to create user accounts, mailboxes, provision, the physical aspects of work. Because that self-service portal can drive runbooks. Not every request offering in your self-service portal, in your service catalog, needs to drive runbooks, right? So there are processes in this world that don't have to be 100% automated.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it might be something that you specifically want to do manually because it may require a manual task that isn't part of a system, for instance. So there's all sorts of different scenarios. DR is another one which you may not want to completely automate. You may want to have somebody trigger something, for instance.
That's a great point. And as we covered in talking about best practices in sorting out which processes are best candidates for automation, there are some processes that a person can perform that we can't easily replicate in machine logic, right? And that's okay. There's always going to be room for a smart person in the chair pushing the buttons who has the right training, etc. So if we automate the easy stuff, it means we can spend our time on the more important stuff. So, which is another sort of nagging anxiety I hear from folks, is that they worry they're going to automate themselves out of a job.
Yep.
Absolutely not. It's really you're automating yourself into an avalanche of requests to do more and more exciting stuff, to really get into more advanced automation scenarios. It's going to be a lot more fun for you than performing all of those manual tasks that we can remember back, many years ago, performing back in the day. So here's our default portal. Again, we were talking about changing those colors and so forth. That's easy enough. So what we have here are the blue labels. These are the categories. This is controlled with a text-based list in the background. If I open my Service Manager console, I go into the library workspace. There's a lists node, and the list is actually the service offering categories. I can add more categories. I can change the language. I see folks to really ease navigation sometimes even put things here, and I may have mentioned this in session 1, I may not, they'll put things like, I need access to a network resource, I need to provision a virtual machine, I need to complete a task for an employee. So they put in some navigational aids. And I say that because that's actually really, really important. If I use the right language in my console, I can reduce the training requirement for this portal, and that's reducing deployment friction. I'm going to have less pushback from my business units if I build something that's so simple that they look at the portal and at first glance say, I can do this. It's going to allow me to accelerate that rollout. Now, right below those categories, we have the service offerings. As you'll see when we look at the service offerings in detail, we can select a category for a service offering. So if I want public cloud self-service provisioning to go up here under a different category like access and security, I simply hit a drop-down menu and change the category I select for that. So I can rearrange these offerings, regroup them any way I like, really. It's very flexible and it's all UI based, so there's no fancy work in the background. So let's talk about and just have a look at for a minute customizing the user experience in our Service Manager console. So when I go to my Service Manager console, I'm going to start down here in the library workspace. So at this point, I assume you've spent some time with us in day one of our Jumpstart. We've already configured the connectors in Service Manager that are populating our CMDB. So we have some assets in the CMDB now, computers, users, some of our virtualization assets. If you weren't here, I'll just point you to where that happens in the UI here. So with the connectors, we're in the administration workspace. There is a connectors node here, and you'll see that I've already configured quite a lot of these for the different components. And you'll notice in some cases I even have multiple connectors of the same type because the connectors typically let me define very granularly what I'm going to pull in. So that is to say I don't need to bring every runbook into my CMDB, my entire Active Directory, config manager, ops manager environment. I can be very selective. Great idea to do that so we don't bloat our CMDB. We don't want to create a manageability headache by just hitting the button and bringing everything in, because it's going to make lists that we need to search longer. It's really going to be a convenience breaker. So I'll go to the library workspace. This is where we find all of our template-based material. So I alluded to that list of categories, those blue headings we see on our self-service portal. It's the service offering category list. I'll just open this up and drill down. You'll see that I have a number of categories I have created here. I can hit add item and I can add as many as I want. I can highlight an existing item and I can change its name in the name field there. And I can type sentences or questions to help build a more intuitive navigational experience in this UI. So let's talk about runbook automation from the self-service portal interface, and where it really starts there is with what we call a runbook automation template. So I'm going to take you through this process, and I'll actually just show you in the UI here some of what we have put together in the form of a completed offering. So over in the navigation space, I can hit the Create Template option, and I'll just pop this open and we'll zoom in so you can see. I want to grab the runbook automation activity, and what I'm going to create here is a runbook automation activity template. So I'm going to browse out to my parent runbook, that runbook number 1 that was driving the creation of the cloud service, and then the container, and then the virtual machine. So it starts by selecting that runbook automation activity, giving this some sort of name, so Azure deployment. I tend to use RBA template when I'm creating runbook automation activity templates, and that's because the templates node in the Service Manager, in the library area here, the templates have all kinds of templates, incident templates, change templates, etc. So by coming up with a very consistent naming convention, I can simply go type, in my case, RBA template, and I know it's going to show me every runbook automation template that I care about. So be thinking about that ahead of time. With other elements, it's easier. Incident is pretty intuitive, right? And Microsoft provides us, if I can spell incident, provides us a lot of incident templates, for example, just right out of the box. But I'm creating something a little more specialized here shall we say. So let's go back and we'll start with this runbook automation activity template. And I have one here for Azure deployment that I created in advance, so we would have kind of a pre-hydrated scenario, so to speak. So after I've run all my connectors, my runbooks are in the CMDB, and you see the runbooks node over here. In my environment, I think I have I've got 60 runbooks now, which is a 50% increase over where I was a week ago. But in my orchestrator environment, I have like 500 or 600 runbooks. So I'm only bringing over what I need. I'm trying to be really efficient here so I don't impact my scalability on the service manager side by bringing in tens of thousands of objects that I'm not really going to pay attention to. All right, so on this runbook automation activity template, I'm over on the runbook tab. I have a select button here where I can browse out and find the runbook that I'm going to trigger to drive this deployment process. So in this case, that runbook is the one.azure deployment runbook. You don't have to use numbers in your naming conventions, but when I'm building an automation scenario that includes multiple runbooks that I expect to trigger in a specific order, I like to do that because it helps my colleagues come in behind me and they can see more or less what's going on by my simple naming conventions and my numeric labeling, so they can understand the order of operations within a reasonable margin of error. So when I select that Azure deployment runbook, you're going to notice that the parameter mapping happens in the background here automatically, and I have quite a lot of parameters in this runbook. So if I drill down here, you'll notice that the parameter mapping shows quite a lot of parameters. These are the inputs that we're expecting in that initialized data activity in our our first runbook where we're triggering the virtual machine provision. So I'm just going to pop back over there and show you where that's coming from. It's coming from initialized data.
Has that automatically been populated?
That was auto. So I did these manually when I created the runbook, right?
Yeah.
They were automatically populated on the other side. That mapping just going to happen automatically.
Right, so it knows those fields automatically.
Yeah, I linked to the runbook. And in day one, if you didn't join us for day one, go back and watch day one and watch session number 4, where we talk about best practices for how you typically build these runbooks, because typically I'd only have one input here. It would be the runbook activity ID. So go back and watch day one. I don't want to repeat for those of you that are here for day 2 that came back to see me, but if you didn't make day 1 within a few days, I believe, to a couple of weeks, they should have the recording out on the session. So say Barry and Danny, the studio gurus, the great minds in the background here. So I get that runbook automation activity template set up there, and my next step is I'm going to have a look at my service template. So I've got another one of those here. I'll just type Azure. Oops, sorry. Let me get into the templates node. Listen to what I mean, not what I actually say. That's really important that you remember that. Write that down. So there you see I have Azure Deployment SR template. So I tend to use acronyms much like I would see in the Service Manager console anyway. SR is service request, RB is runbook, RBA is runbook activity. So some standards like that allow me to shorten names but to provide clear meaning as I'm going through this. Now within my service request, every offering we put in the service catalog within the service offering and the request offerings beneath, those are typically going to be service requests. In a service request template, I have an activities pane, where an activities tab where I can add activities. There's a little plus sign up here that will allow me to add activities, and you'll see I have a couple of here. We're in what we call diagram view right now. I'm going to flip over to list view because it's a little bit easier to see. And if you haven't seen this before, you'll know what I mean when I flip over. So now I can read what I put in the title of those activities. So RA stands for review activity. That's a default review activity, which is, think of that as approval workflow. If I want to build approval to get the thumbs up from one or more people, that's how I can do that. FAQ, can I have tiered approvals where when one group completes their approval, we have another tier that has to approve after? The answer is absolutely yes. Now you notice the second activity there is the activity that actually triggers the runbook, the runbook automation activity. This is going to pass pass whatever input we've mapped over to that other runbook. So I'm going to hit the plus sign here, which is the add button, and I will find for you a review activity. And I'm going to do this just to make sure we cover off the default review activity and what we can do in terms of approval workflow. So I'm going to create nested approval. So I could call this executive approval. So maybe after we finish the lower level approval, the departmental folks drill in. I want to go a little further. So with this review activity, this approval scenario, I wanted to show you the approval conditions, because you'll see unanimous, which means if I have more than one user, they all have to approve. I can set a percentage and then define a percentage based on the number of people and what I'm comfortable with. But even if I don't require approval today, I like to work with the folks that are involved with ITIL in my environment, the service management folks. And if I don't require approval today, I will simply say this change, that this request then is automatically approved, and I'll set that approval condition to automatic, which means that if down the road my approval requirements change, my process evolves, I can simply come back, update this review activity, and I'm good to go. But what I'm going to do here, I'll set say a percentage. I can add users, and you'll notice when I add users, I have the option to. I love these fields. The fields are very much keyboard driven, so when I type something there, it automatically looks into my CMDB and gives me, I typed Haven and it finds Haven Forward. But for the individual users I add into the workflow, I have the capability to define some with veto power, some who are required voters in order for me to proceed. That percentage option comes in handy when you have 4 or 5 people and you want to get, any 1 or 2, understanding that some people may go on holiday. Or just be extra busy sometimes, so I can set that approval threshold and add multiple people here and make that very flexible in terms of getting at least some approval from the right people. And for that tiered approval, before I deploy the runbook, I'm just going to drag that review activity right up there. And so what happens when this workflow kicks off, the active activity will actually have where you see that little starburst, it'll have a green arrow which indicates that that activity is in progress. All of the other activities will have an hourglass indicating they're waiting for something occurring previously in the workflow. To be very clear, the workflow can get much more complex, and just to give you some things to go off and explore and think about, we have even some containers in here, this default sequential activity. We can use the parallel activity option, which allows these sequential activity container and parallel activity containers allow me to put multiple activities into a container. So imagine in a parallel activity type workflow, I could have 2 streams happening simultaneously. Perhaps I have a very complex onboarding process. I can have a non-technical set of activities that are very sequential, and perhaps some technical activities that are sequential. And this parallel activity container will allow me to build more complex nested workflows. So go have a look at sequential and parallel activities and start going down that road. I bring up that user onboarding scenario because virtual machine provisioning tends to be fairly linear. We're going to get an approval and then we're going to deploy something that will check capacity and do its thing. When we look at some of the less technical elements that could still be high value workflows and automated self-service offerings in a private cloud or a hybrid cloud scenario, user onboarding is one of those that strikes me because it has nothing to do with virtual machine provisioning, but it could potentially be driving some activities automatically, and in other cases simply triggering a manual activity that sends a person an email to let them know that they have a task they need to complete. So a lot of flexibility there. So once we create our service request template, we've got our review activity in there and our runbook automation activity. We're going to go look at service and request offering under the service catalog node here. So the request offering being that lowest level offering that the user is going to click. So let me just drill down to one of those in the portal here. So in my cloud and data center services, you see I have a service offering for private cloud, meaning my on-prem or my hosted private cloud resources. And then I have public cloud. So this private cloud self-service avenue is what we looked at yesterday, where we actually had deployment for a new service, and we were leveraging our multi-tier service template. and we simply used a query-based list to present a list of the service templates that we populated in our environment. And I'm showing you this in case you weren't with us yesterday. I really want to incent you to go back and watch session number 1 where we talked about how we do some of this. You notice I have my services in there. I have my release versions for my template. Now, for those of you that were with us in part 1 in the private cloud session, I told you that while service templates are populated in the CMDB automatically, that releases are not. And so I need to tell you what you need to go find in order to update the process so the releases appear. The connectors, the VMM connectors, the Ops Manager connectors, etc., they bring in certain classes of information by default. So what you'll need to do is actually go update, I believe it's the VMM connector. There is a PowerShell query that's bringing some data back, and what it doesn't have is that release property. The information you need is actually out on the, I believe it's the Cloud Builder blog, but I am at PZERGER. You've got my Twitter handle. If you can't find what I'm promising you out on the Cloud Builder blog, by all means.
Or the Building Clouds blogs.
Yeah, I keep saying the Cloud Builder blog. I really want it to be the Cloud. It's the Building Clouds blog. Track me down on Twitter, ping the Microsoft Virtual Academy folks, and we'll get you to the place where you can find how to bring that in. It's going to be a little bit of XML work in the connector definition, but it's a reasonably well documented process, so you can sort out what you need to add. But really important, right? If I want to present different versions of my my service templates and give people maybe the capability to deploy newer versus older. Based on their specific criteria. But in my UI here, if you weren't with us yesterday, I want you to notice that we have not only Hyper-V based templates, but I've got a service template that deploys to the VMware stack. So we can deploy to VMware with those advanced deployment capabilities just as easily as we can with Hyper-V.
What determines which templates I will see? Because obviously in VMM, when I go into a cloud and I choose deploy from cloud, VMM is allocated, or you've given permission to use certain templates as part of that user role within VMM. So what in this context stops me from seeing certain templates and allows me to see others?
It's almost as though Matt is a well-versed technology evangelist that's driving the process. So let's go look at the next step, and we'll answer the perfect question that Matt teed up there. How do we control all of that? So I'm going to go look at my request offerings. Now the request offering that we're working with here has already been published. But down here under the service catalog node, and I'll just pull this up, under the service catalog node you'll notice I have request offerings and service offerings, and you'll see publish versus draft. So you might ask, published and unpublished or draft are probably obvious enough. You might ask, what is a standalone request offering? That is a request offering that has not been placed into a service offering, so it has no category. So we call it a standalone in that case.
What would you use that? Is that almost like a staging area before you move it into a category, or
no, not really.
Just leave it on its own.
So the staging process, in my view, is going to be not publishing. So you could call it staging. If you don't put them into service offerings, you should still be able to see in a list view, basically. And let me show you what I mean by that. When we're in the self-service portal, by default you have this category view. So over here, I can see a list view and I can search. So maybe your organization is mature and you've been doing this for a while and building the more complex scenarios, and I know I need to do some user onboarding. I can go out here and hit the magic filter, and there I see my user onboarding request that drives all of that information. So it's just the request offering, service offering category hierarchy just gives us some navigational aid, basically. So let's drill down into this request offering here. So I'm in the library workspace still. I'm under service catalog, request offerings, and we'll assume that I've already completed some of this, but I want to walk you through what I have here. So the user prompts. So what I'm doing here in the user prompts is one-to-one defining what the user is going to see in their Azure self-service workflow. So these prompts map one-to-one with fields that will be on the form that they see. So we'll just back out of there and leave that open. I'm going to go back over to our portal. And this time I'll drill down into the public cloud offering where I have the Azure-based deployment, self-service deployment. And here, right now this is much less fancy. I'm really doing a lot of, in day one we really did a lot of enhancements with the drop downs and the query-based list. But here you see I've just put in some text-based fields. And I've customized these different ways for a couple of different customers. So some of these things aren't really meaningful to an end user. So I might collect from the end user actually a little more than just the computer name, the NetBIOS name. I might drop out a lot of these inputs and use some orchestrator magic to automatically calculate the name for some of those background components based on the NetBIOS computer name and the owner's department. Very easy to work with text strings in PowerShell and Run.NET script activities. There's an activity for generating a complex password for the Azure portal, remembering that we don't want to use things like the standard password option. And you notice that we have the red fields here. That's because that field is required. And again, I can put constraints on that field so I don't have fields that get too long. Like right there, I've already typed. You notice that it stopped me there. That's because a NetBIOS name can only have 15 characters. I put some validation on that field to make sure that somebody doesn't give me a machine name that's longer than Windows will allow. And if I have numeric fields, etc., I can enforce that same sort of validation using an integer property or dropping into regular expressions. Particularly with regards to Azure, if I have certain values that don't accept capital letters, I think container is one of those that, if memory serves, that sort of gets a little angry. It's in a bad mood if we try to give it capital letters. I might use regular expressions to validate these, so I can make sure we only get good data. So we'll just go back over here and look at our template. So I've gone down the list of all of those inputs. So again, those inputs here came from bringing in my runbook automation activity template into the service request, and all of these prompts now. I'm just building the prompts to map to the inputs that I want to collect for that user. And you can come in here and make these titles really long. You have a lot of real estate on the screen there, so if you want to put some for example type information, or NetBIOS name, not to exceed 15 characters, however you want to use this screen real estate you have to help the user navigate the self-service scenario without having to train them quite a lot. That's a great way to do it. Now we have to configure these prompts in some respects too. So these are all just text-based prompts. What I could do is potentially get a little bit fancier and use a simple list, for example. So if I wanted to present an operating system option, for example, what I could do for an OS option, let me just add a drop down here for OS version. Rather than using text, I could use a simple list. So text really doesn't require much configuration other than I'm going to configure the validation, but I want to just go down and show you the configuring of the prompts and what that means in the real world. So if I highlight computer name, and you'll notice that since I'm updating an existing OS version is lit up in red because it hasn't been configured. Everything else is good because it's just string, free text input. I wanted to show you the controls now. So for text, for validating string-based data, I have a lot of off-the-shelf capability here. So in this case, for the NetBIOS name, you notice I'm allowing any string with a minimum and maximum length. I've got some numeric validators there for phone numbers, international phone numbers, email address, but regular expression is kind of that last resort that's very, very flexible. If I can write a regular expression to validate it, it's very easy to do. In fact, I find I use that one a lot within organizations because we collect maybe an email address from the requester, but we need to make sure the email address corresponds to somebody in a specific email domain. So we'll ask them for their email address, and if it doesn't map to yourorganization.com, whatever that may be, we'll actually bounce it back and say, hey, you're not within our org, so give us another address. But lots of capability there, and I point out that regular expression because I said Azure in some cases doesn't like caps. So for those fields that don't like capital letters, I can use that .NET regular expression, and I can put some regex in there that will prevent the input of capital letters if that's what I want to prevent. So you want to think about the validation, because we can make this just darn near bulletproof or foolproof, as you might say. So let's look at configuration of a list-based control. So a simple list is quite literally a text-based list where I'm going to put display names. Windows, so we were doing operating systems, right? Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1, and I can just go down the list here in whatever versions, however specific I need to be. This will allow me in my orchestrator runbook to build some branching logic that will provision different kinds of virtual machines, different operating systems based on what I'm gathering from my user. And I can put in here the different editions, data center, standard, etc. So whatever makes sense, that's going to give me a list version. I have to map my prompts to values. If you don't get all of your prompts mapped to a value appropriately, we don't have to necessarily deal with 100% of these, but if you're missing something, the UI is actually going to stop you from going on. So yesterday we looked at a different kind of control. We looked at a query-based list. So if I just go back to user prompts here, I'll change one of these. I'll change service description over to query-based list. So Matt, this actually speaks to what we were talking about in the UI here, where you raised the very valid question with our private cloud offering. How do I limit what shows up in that query-based list? So we're going to look at that list and then just talk about what our capabilities are. So we were right here, and we had a list of just particular service templates. So a query-based list actually lets us populate the list with a certain class of objects, and then we have some filtering capability so I can establish some additional criteria. So I might say show all of the templates where the name contains web app, for example, which was my my application here, my custom line of business app in my environment. For Active Directory, I can actually use a query-based list to show only the Active Directory groups that are in a specific OU. So we'll actually go back and look at this request offering in just a bit to look at the query-based list to show you how that's populated, because that one is very good for allowing us to just present a subset of the information that's in our CMDB. That's why I was so adamant about populating our CMDB with all of that data, because if it's in the CMDB, I can use the query-based list to dynamically populate based on what's there at the time. So as you build more service templates, we're synchronizing those over. We customize the VMM connector, so we make sure we get the release in there as well.
Yep.
It's going to be a very dynamic experience at that point. I don't have to come back and touch this template as I build more services. I do, down in my fabric, need to make sure that my self-service user roles get permissions to those new templates as I roll them out, but the front end is very much a set it and forget it operation if I make it dynamic enough. And I'm going to try to make it dynamic in a way that I'm not forcing folks to enter quite so much free text. This offering's got a lot of prompts here, which is going to get tiresome, and the harder people have to work, the less likely they are going to be to use your offering. And particularly for offerings like this, where we're driving the automation with Orchestrator, you can go look in the orchestration web console and see how many times the runbook has been initiated, how many successes, how many failure, and that's going to give you an idea when you think about how much effort it took to automate a particular process, if you were successful or not. Because our success is really going to be defined by, did we build something that's going, can be reused enough, but did we build it in such a way that people are comfortable using it? It's not more work than they want to go to.
So before we progress any further on the service request offerings front, how do I customize the portal from a colors, from a logo, just that initial kind of, how do I get going with that?
Yeah, so I'm basically going to go over into my Service Manager console, into my self-service portal here.
So I actually go to the portal.
Yeah, I'm going to start drilling down in here and getting into the nasties to basically change colors and so forth in the admin menu.
Right.
Travis Wright who I kind of think of as the godfather of Service Manager, has some good articles out on the Building Clouds blog for customizing this portal and kind of outlining the limits. So that key area, we can do the colors, we can change our logo up here to get our corporate piece in. We can update this component right here, the need help area. I've seen folks turn this into the announcement. So out on Anders' blog at contoso.se, he actually has a ready-made run book that will take your announcements out of the Service Manager console. So in the administration area of the Service Manager console, I'm going to give you kind of a lesser known fact here. In the administration workspace of the Service Manager console, we have the announcements node. So back in the 2010 version of Service Manager, when you put an announcement here and it had a valid date in there, it would show up on your self-service portal. Well, we got a total rework of that portal over into SharePoint with Service Manager 2012, so these announcements don't appear anywhere today. But with the little orchestrator magic, I can read those announcements using the Service Manager integration pack and drive them straight over to that portal. And I don't have a good customization example for you, but if you
but as long as you would do that just through purely the SharePoint.
Yeah. I'm just going to get into the SharePoint interface and start doing a little customizing in there. So it helps to sort of look at Travis's boundaries around that, because you can basically do colors, fonts, some URLs when we get down into certain areas, but we don't have like widgets we can drag and drop around, or really any dramatic change to the feel of the portal. We're still, the service catalog is very much going to have the same feel, even if we've changed the skin, so to speak. So you have more questions for me before we take the next step?
No, I think that was it. I was just wanting to make sure that we ensured that people knew where to go if they'd want to start to tweak those colors, those logos and stuff. But we've delved into some of the service requests, the request offerings, and obviously if you're new to the whole service management ITIL space, some of those terms will be flying past your head, and it's useful to just get to grips with and understand and delve a little bit deeper. And yeah, I think that's where the demo has taken us so far.
Yeah. And Jumpstart day one as well. We had about 10 minutes where we looked at 10 or 15 minutes where we looked at the bare necessities within the Service Manager portal. We talked about incident and problem and change management and some of those ITIL concepts, and I think we got about 3 acronyms in before Simon stopped and said, "What in the world is a CMDB?" So definitely. The CMDB I briefly mentioned has our assets that we've populated: computers, users, groups, application components, service templates, etc. from our various System Center components. Go back and have a look at what we did in day one to get into a little bit greater depth there. The 2-day Jumpstart is really sort of a 2-day complementary exercise where we're building our way from the bottom of our private cloud fabric to the summit here, where we have a hybrid scenario all out of a single interface. So at this point, we've imported our runbooks into our CMDB using the runbook connector that simply connects Service Manager to Orchestrator via the Orchestrator web service. We have created a runbook automation activity template, which contained our mapping. Basically, we had those inputs into that template. We've added that runbook automation activity template into a service request. So we added it into the activity in our activity space within the service request template that we created. We just looked at the request offering, so we looked at that lowest level piece that the user is going to click on. We now need to look at the service offering that we need to nest that in. Once we've got that service offering out of the way, then we need to talk about how we actually reveal this to the user through catalog group. So let's have a look at the next step, which is going to be the service offering, where we add the request offering. So looking at our console here, just to tie off that last discussion, always remember that your request offerings and service offerings are never going to be visible in the console in the self-service portal unless they are in a published state. So the status here of draft is the default, and when I flip that draft to publish, that's when I'm lighting that up to give the permission basically for that to appear in the console. You notice the offering owner there That came up yesterday offline. The offering owner allows us to put somebody in here who's responsible for this, and in a couple of organizations we actually have kind of a periodic email that asks those owners to go out, check your offering, make sure it's still relevant. If it's not relevant, tell us, so we know what we can do to keep this fresh and useful in our environment. Understanding that our needs are going to evolve over time. We do that with Orchestrator, actually. We put that in there, and then quarterly we drive some emails out using a pretty simple runbook with the send email activity at the end, just to fire that off. So let us go to the service offerings node here. So I have a service offering that is published right now for that public cloud capability. Public cloud self-service provisioning is where we saw that request. So if I just double click in here and look, you'll notice when we look at the service offering, you remember the category is that top level blue menu, right? So you'll notice that the category I hit from the drop down is the data center and cloud services. That is literally just showing me the drop down from the simple text menu, the list that we saw earlier, that I can change to whatever it is that makes sense for me. You notice we have the description field here where we can tell people what they might use this offering for. We can change the image up there. You see it's empty by default. We can get icon sets that you can buy icon sets in a million places on the internet and put different little fancy icons in here.
A little face.
Yeah, if we wanted Matt McSpirit's face in the little icon there, I'm not sure that would be and it would be a little odd in my environment. I'd be a little uneasy, but you may have noticed even in my sample here, I think I was using keys because that was one of the defaults that was on my drive here. And something a little different there, I gathered. So some folks pay a lot of attention to those icons. The polish is very important. I'll leave it to you. Just understand that as you're building your service offering, the image is right there for you. So if you're the flash sort of person, by all means, I don't want to discourage you. You notice here that as I go through the service offering, I can put information in here about service level agreement, where they can go in our environment in the knowledge base to see information about that. I can even put cost info here. So I've got some capability to provide a little more information that I can leverage. Now request offering is where I wanted to drive you to, because the service offering is the container that contains one or more related request offerings. You'll notice here that the request offering we just walked through, that Azure self-service offering, is in the list here. If I hit add, I'm going to get a list of all of the request offerings in my environment automatically. And you'll see some of those are some of the defaults that come in. They're not English, so you could go delete some of those with no ill effects.
Well, assuming they're not relevant to you,
Yeah. So I tend to leave those in because it's not uncommon that I have conversations with folks in Europe, or we talk about some of the other languages, Cyrillic or Slavic languages, Cyrillic character sets, etc. And then Service Manager being a fully globalized, localized product that supports many languages.
So the significance of that knowledge base, we touched on it briefly as part of that that service offering. What are the different places where that can be populated? Can we utilize? How does it link in with the Microsoft knowledge base? So KB articles, those kind of things. What is the relationship there for people who want to just help users in the most effective way?
He's putting me on the spot, isn't he? That's not very nice of him. But we'll have a look at that. So we're going to
wealth of experience.
We're going to look at knowledge management in Service Manager. It's a great question. It comes up. It's an area that most organizations don't spend a lot of time. And about 3 times a year, somebody will ask me, and I will talk until they stop me. So I'll try to make this brief. So you'll notice here I'm in the library space. So I like to say anything that involves me reading or writing something, it typically happens in the library space. So in the library space, I have knowledge, and you'll see all knowledge articles, all archived, draft, and published. So you can guess what most of those mean. So published meaning something that's out there for everybody to see. Draft being something that's in progress, archive being something we are probably retiring, generally speaking. So in my published articles, you'll see I have a couple of articles here around troubleshooting Exchange on my printer. So I'm going to double click on that existing offering.
2 very common scenarios.
Yes.
If it's not one, it's not Exchange, it's your printer, and vice versa.
So I'm just going to drill into one of those knowledge articles, and we're going to have a look at how this comes together, what the format is, and then I'm going to flip over and show you the user experience. What we're looking at now is the administrator experience, where I am putting this offering together. So you'll notice here there's a rating option. This is really for maybe our analyst or what have you to rate high to low, etc. They can put comments.
I take it 1 is high.
Yeah. You'll notice I have a name for this, how to troubleshoot a desktop printer that's not working, description, how to restart, blah, 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 blah. I have some keywords here to aid in search. I can also tag knowledge articles with owners. I can put categories in here.
What's the significance of that little bubble next to the...
That little bubble. So when I want to put the knowledge article owner here, so I'm going to pick on Haven Ford because she is my favorite. So if I type Haven's name here, there's an automatic lookup that kicks off to find her, so I don't have to mouse around or anything.
Is that looking within the Service Manager database or data warehouse, or is that querying AD immediately?
CMDB.
Yeah.
I find that when I need to populate fields with information, if it exists in Active Directory and it exists in my CMDB, I'm almost always going to go to my CMDB. Mm-hmm. Can you guess why?
No.
I want to minimize my external calls. I can call out to Active Directory with enough activities in Orchestrator, but I may need to use some PowerShell, but then I get into those gray areas of, are we using AD 2003, 2008, R2, 2012, and what I do in the heavy end of PowerShell tends to be really for the latest and greatest, and invariably when I need that, it's for somebody that's running Active Directory in 2003. So I always try to get as much as I can from the CMDB because it's local, it's easy. I don't have to work hard to get it. And
Service Manager is through the connector is checking with AD on a periodic basis and bringing in those new users, I guess.
Yeah. So I want you to bring me back to lifecycle management of our assets in the CMDB because I want to show you, I want to drive home this point of how easy that CMDB is, not only in terms of initial population, but lifecycle management. There's a lot going on there, and I run up against a lot of other service desk components, CMDBs in the world, and this is where System Center really, really excels. It even gives me in many enterprise scenarios a lot of information that I can drive over to those other CMDBs that maybe aren't quite so easily populated. I get a lot of information into Service Manager, and then I can drive it into a lot of directions with Orchestrator. So let's cover off Matt's knowledge article discussion here, and then we'll drive back over there quickly. This is all kind of an aside, but hopefully useful for you. So
that little bubble was the user, and then
yeah. So the little bubble. So let's go back to the UI here if we can, and the little bubble is going to allow me to just pop up a little list to check for folks if I want to check for names. I don't typically do that. I typically type until I hit it right. But see, I typed Al here, and there are multiple folks that match that. So this is going to give me just a short list. What I never do is type nothing at all and then hit that because it's going to show me everybody, and that's going to take a while in some environments.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of customers with 5,000 users. That's a drop-down list I can promise you don't want to see.
That's a coffee drop-down.
That is, yes, that's right. So in the console here in the General tab, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. I just want to show you external content. This is one element of knowledge. So external content, I can link out to a URL. So you see I have for my troubleshooting printer problems, Microsoft has some guidance there, so I can teach folks to fish, so to speak.
Nice.
And if I go over to the analyst column, this is the information my analyst is going to see. So to be clear, this is information somebody in the analyst role who's processing work items, service requests, incidents, changes, etc. This is what they're going to see in the full Service Manager console, albeit with role-based security. I'm going to be hiding some of those navigational panes from them. They won't see the administrator workspace, for example. So we've got the different perspectives, and here you see the feedback that comes in based on the ratings and the comments. I can come over here and I can link to other knowledge articles. I can link to even some attached files. Question comes up a lot, what's the format of these knowledge articles? Is it HTML? Is it something else? It's actually rich text format. We'll actually just look a knowledge article up in the self-service portal and see what the user experience is for that information. But just wanted to point out that our analyst is going to see different information than our end user is going to see from their perspective. So here's some other internal content. So I have information I can show the end user here, etc. So let's pretend like I've published this, and I'll just go to the self-service portal, and we'll kind of tie this discussion off. As I come out here, you'll notice that I have the capability to find help articles. So if I click over here, what were we talking about? We were talking about printers, right? So you see
printers or Exchange, one of those
printers
two.
or Exchange. So we can search for two things in my very rich knowledge database. So you see it says search for help articles. I'll type printer, and it's going to go out and find all the printer articles. How to troubleshoot a printer that's not working. I click the button to pull that up. It actually has the name and my description there. So as that pops up, oh sorry, I'm getting my little prompt there. I've got my Internet Explorer browser on lockdown. So that's going to open Word in this case because I have Word installed. Now if you didn't have Word installed, WordPad would open. RTF rich text format is pretty easy to open up here. The question does come in, can I bring that over into an HTML format instead? Unfortunately not. Something I think Microsoft is aware of and working on that maybe, a more universal format might be that. So in case you're one of those folks, I wanted to just put it all out there, so to speak. So back to the CMDB quickly, and then I want to get back to that offering, because our self-service offering at this point, we've created the runbook automation activity, we've created the service request template, we've created the request offering, that lowest level element the user is going to click, and we've put it into a service offering so we know where in the portal it's going to appear. Now we just need to use those catalog groups to publish it out to the folks. But I'm going to digress for just one moment because Matt opened a separate can of worms around the CMDB, which was a great question, but I want to just cover off configuration items, and not just the population but the lifecycle management. So we're going to go into the configuration items workspace in our console here, and we're going to look at some of the configuration items that we see in our Service Manager UI. So if you'll look with me in the console here, I'll look at my computers, for example. So Service Manager, when we populate all of these configuration items over the various connectors coming in from Active Directory, from Configuration Manager, from Operations Manager, it's very intelligent in how it brings this information in. So I'm going to grab my development workstation that I work on most frequently. It has quite a bit going on, and I've just double-clicked that workstation. So I'll show you where I went. I went to the so I went into the configuration items workspace area, I highlighted computers, and I searched for my computer, which was W7X64. And here are the properties of that computer. Now on this this configuration item, which I just effectively hid from you, can you find it? Right here. We'll just populate that. I have a lot of information that's coming from different sources here. So I see the Active Directory SID. I don't have to guess where that came from. I see the serial number. I want to point out to you this is a VMware virtual machine. So that's one of my little bonuses for connecting into my VMware hypervisor through vCenter with VMM. Even if I'm doing some deployment, I'm going to get some visibility into what's going on out there, either from VMM or from Operations Manager potentially at the end of the day. So lots of information coming from Active Directory. I'm just going to start going across the tabs here. You see some hardware information. So some of this no doubt coming from Configuration Manager, some maybe from Operations Manager. I have a software tab there. And you see related items over there. So look at my software. I have a lot of software in my development workstation. All of this is coming from ConfigMan. I'm going to show you how you'll know where it's coming from in just a moment. I wanted to point out related items. As I create incidents, problems, changes, I can, on the related items tab, on the related items tab of an incident, I can add this computer and vice versa from here. So over the course of the year, if I create my work items and attach the affected computers, users, etc., on those configuration items, we will see all of the work items that are associated with them, which means at the end of the year, I'll be able to tell, you'll be able to run a report and see, which computer had the most service requests, which application, incurred the most incidents, for example. So I'm going to go over to the History tab, Life Cycle Management. What happens on the History tab is by default we're keeping about a year of history here with all of the changes that occur on this configuration item. So if something happens, if you come in one day and suddenly things look different, I can come in here and start looking down the list. So you notice here I had a relationship change recently, and it actually removed Haven Ford as the primary user for this computer because Haven hasn't logged in here in a few weeks, frankly. And my algorithm in Configuration Manager, which calculates that information automatically, has dynamically via the connector made that update. So I didn't have to, from a service desk perspective, ask the user, where are you now, and update this because their new desktop is going to get a Configuration Manager agent, and in due time that information is going to show up here automatically. So it's not just from a hybrid cloud scenario that we can solve problems. So there's a lot of rich data that comes in here for anything from public cloud, private cloud, desktop support, application support, release management. I can get pretty creative, but a lot of the heavy lifting is done for me. And incidentally, when I remove this computer from Active Directory, I get rid of the agent from Configuration Manager. Service Manager takes that as its cue of hey, it must be time to retire this application. Service Manager never deletes anything without our permission, but in the administration workspace you will find a list of deleted items. These are items pending delete that we can get rid of. I can come in and review these and delete them one by one. I can use PowerShell or Orchestrator to delete them en masse. Doesn't matter really, but I just wanted to point out that Service Manager via that connector sees when it pulls in information from 8 sources about a computer named W7X64. That's not 8 computers named W7X64. It's the same computer, and so we're just supplementing that all the way through. So all of those decision criteria that would be involved in building a great automation process to populate your CMDB, it's done for you. You get it for free with Service Manager. So, and yeah, it does. To one of the viewers' points earlier in the day, Service Manager takes a little more hardware than some of the other System Center components. Fair point. It's doing a lot of work at the end of the day, isn't it? And so with all of that capability comes a little extra
required.
Compute. Yes, there's a little bit of extra work going on there. So let me get back into my Service Manager console here, and we'll get the ball rolling, and we'll just tie off this service request process. So we've been a long time in the UI. I'm just going to, while that screen's opening, I want to make sure there's nothing else we want to cover off before we deal with this. I think that no, I think Matt dropped us into a pretty good place here. So we'll look at lifecycle management as soon as we tie off the publishing and we get this this new offering into the portal. So the piece we haven't done yet is configured our catalog groups to expose the service offering and the request offering out to our self-service user group.
We could have left it as a standalone in a list.
But we'd still have to go at least in the from a request offering perspective, make sure we granted some permissions there. And really, I think in almost 100% of the scenarios, we don't have anything that we're trying to drive from the list. We tend to be very category focused, honestly, because we're dealing with a lot of users that want an easy experience, and the hierarchy of the category service request, service offering, request offering is really intuitive. So I'm going to go back to the library workspace. We're back to the library. If you haven't been to the library in a while, today I've changed all that for you, and for that, you're welcome. So I've created some catalog item groups here, and if I just do a quick search for my data center and cloud services, service offering and request offerings, that's the area where I wanted to place that. You'll notice I have data and cloud services service offerings, and I have request offerings. So I'm going to grant access at each level, which means I can grant you access at the service offering level. But if I have multiple request offerings, I don't necessarily need to show you all of them. What do I mean by that? So let's look at another service offering. We will look at access services, where I have multiple request offerings. So maybe I want to show everybody this service offering category, but I don't necessarily want to show everybody all of these request offerings. I can make some decisions at that level of granularity. Show the bucket they're all in, but don't necessarily show the bottom, 100% of those request offerings, depending on the group. So I'm going to go into the lowest level here first. You can do these in no particular order, frankly.
Or any particular order.
Yeah, or any particular order. So I'm going to no particular order. So you see here that my included members are in this private cloud. I have the new service request and the advanced request. So this was kind of the area we worked in yesterday. Get out of our Zoom it mode there for just a second. And then at the service offering level, we do the same thing. Now on the Azure side, though, we want to go back and see what we want to get the name of our offering for the Azure request. So just to get back over to my portal here quickly, I had the different bucket that I put my public cloud in. So I have a different category catalog group that corresponds to this public cloud. We were just looking over here. So I want to focus on where my Azure-based offering would go. But to tie off the discussion here, I add those to the service offering level. I have to add them to the request offering level as well, either in the included members tab. Now you notice this is very manual. I've added these manually using the add button, which shows me all of the request offerings. And this is perfectly functional, but I just want to point out that we can do this dynamically if we want as well. So I have a dynamic members tab there that would allow me to do something query-based that would just pull in maybe everything that is a service request, maybe everything that is a service request that matches a specific criteria. So you see here it gives me kind of a limited search, and since I'm dealing with request offerings, I can specify the class, and I can go in here and say, okay, I want you to take everything with a specific comment in it, where the comment contains something, like everything that contains finance. I'm going to dynamically show those to I'm going to dynamically put those in this catalog group, and then I can take this catalog group and go grant permissions to the finance self-service user role. Now I have something very dynamic. I don't have to come back and revisit my catalog groups for finance. I simply need to mark their offerings with that finance comment, and the rest is going to take care of itself. So we try to make these catalog groups dynamically populated based on those criteria. I suggest you just play around with those and get a feel for how they work in terms of those dynamic capabilities. Now, to tie this off, I have to grant the self-service user role, where I'm granting permissions to my service catalog, visibility into those, the request offerings and service offerings in the catalog group. So let's go back to the UI. Let's look at our user roles under security in the administration workspace. So in that area where we do the heavy lifting. So I click on administration, I expand security. Here you see user roles. If you look over to the right, you'll see data center and cloud services, SM portal, access, end user role. So this is where I'm granting folks some permission in this particular case. Now you see I've got one up here for access and security as well. So I've kind of broken things out so I can give people access to some and not others, because frankly this data center and cloud services area is probably something going to be driven from more of an IT centric application owner perspective. I don't want to show finance people how to deploy virtual machines because I don't care about virtual machines. So let's just double click into data center and cloud services and look at how we deal with this in the user role. So within the user role, I have something called catalog item groups. I have a little tab here, and if I drill down into here, you'll notice that I have checked the box next to only the selected groups I want to give them access to. And anything I want them to see, I've checked that box. So all of my catalog item groups are here. I don't necessarily have to check 100% of them. So if I don't check the box, they're not going to see it. So I'm thinning out the irrelevant information in their service catalog. So I'm targeting the experience to the specific user role in the chair at this point. And in the end, when I've taken that last step, it's only then when we drill down into the public cloud or private cloud offering that we get that end user visibility into these offerings. I hear a fair bit. I see in the forums a fair bit. I've given people access to the portal, but it's blank. We have to give them something to see. So incidentally, if they come here and it's blank,
completely blank,
any authenticated user, if we look to the lower right of the portal, there's a little blue box there that says create a request. This is tied to an incident, and it will drive an incident in that respect. So hopefully that clears some things up, maybe opens up some questions in your mind, because I'm going to be excited to see if this generates any questions for those of you on. So I want to talk about lifecycle management, show you a couple of interesting possibilities here. And Azure, infrastructure as a service, this brings us back to the nasty S word at the end of the day. When we make provisioning a convenient process, a pain-free process, then sprawl automatically becomes a concern. We need to think about managing the life cycle. We looked at that aging report earlier, something just very simple to drive the activity back to the person responsible. And I could have just as easily taken that and customized that runbook a bit to send an email out to the virtual machine owner and maybe CC'd the administrator. Lots of ways we can drive user behavior in a way that's not all or nothing. We're not automatically, storing or deleting virtual machines. We're just driving some behavior to say, hey, we've warned you, and maybe we're going to take a snapshot and delete this if you don't get back to us. But we've got a lot of flexibility in how we drive the end of the life cycle at the end of the day. And it's really not just about provisioning and deprovisioning or retiring, so to speak, but there are other things to think about. The assets in Azure may be kind of out of sight, out of mind, right? We deploy them out there. We're not deploying System Center agents to anything that we saw there today, at least initially. Maybe we want to tie those systems back with the VPN gateway that we talked about. So there's certainly a scenario we can get to where full agent-based management would be possible, but certainly in the beginning it's not going to be. So for VMs that don't have a System Center agent installed, maybe aren't a member of an Active Directory environment, they're going to fall outside the scope of those connectors, right? So I need to think about, as I'm deploying things with Orchestrator, as I'm deploying, virtual machines and creating cloud services and storage and so forth, what can I do with System Center to maybe drive some visibility into Service Manager? At the end of the day, our CMDB, our Configuration Management Database, is kind of the center of all knowledge in our environment. It's the center of reporting. It's where when I create a work item, when I create an incident or a change, I can associate it to that asset. So at the end of the reporting cycle, I can hit a button and run that report, or open Excel and Power Pivot and show my stakeholders, here is where we're spending our time. It's how we drive continual improvement. I had the pleasure some years ago of writing a white paper with the service management organization within Microsoft. I interviewed a very smart woman who was one of the original authors of the Microsoft Service Catalog. I interviewed the man who drove the reporting mechanism where he was driving that continuous improvement reporting multiple times a year. And it's exactly that sort of capability that we're enabling within Service Manager. If we get the assets into the CMDB, so when I create the work items, I create that relationship between the two, I'm going to be able to drive the reports right out of the native reporting area within Service Manager. I can use Excel and Power Pivot and get into the OLAP cubes that are created for me. So important. But bottom line, VM sprawl is not a private cloud phenomenon, so we want to look at how we can drive information back in there. So adding assets to Azure, back into the Service Manager CMDB enables some governance at the end of the day, some lifecycle management, and our options are several. So we can get into Active Directory, Federation, or Azure-based domain controllers and Configuration Manager and Ops Manager agents. I could even look at that CSV import option we looked at and demonstrated on day one, to maybe just run a PowerShell script, get a comma-separated value file with a list of Azure virtual machines and the associated service and the IP address. Maybe we'll have a look at that CSV import again. It only takes a minute for those of you that weren't able to join us on day one. I can also do a direct insert into the CMDB via an Orchestrator runbook. Not really trying to show you a polished production scenario, but I'm trying to draw you the map here to really just point out, it's not all that complicated. So when I want to get information, from here over to here, the tie that binds in System Center is Orchestrator. It's really kind of the glue that brings all of these components together in a very intuitive way. We can insert the info as part of a separate process. Typically, I would tend to have some sort of small function-specific runbook where when I'm done, I might pass over the name of the service, the virtual machine, the IP address, etc. If there's not a cloud service class in the CMDB by default, very easy to create your own custom class. To create that cloud service class, I can do that in the Service Manager authoring console with 0 lines of code. I remember one of my junior people, I asked them to go create a custom class, and he said, I've never used Service Manager, and I mean this. He said, I've never used Service Manager. I sent him a link to one of Travis Wright's blogs and said, here you go, call me if you get stuck. And he came back, I don't know, hour and a half later, he'd done a little reading, and he had created the custom class for me. It was fantastic. So it's not a challenging process. When you customize your CMDB, though, know that you're going to be doing that in the Service Manager authoring tool. It creates a management pack, and then we import that to bring our changes into the CMDB, which is great because, number one, bringing a management pack in is a pretty deliberate operation. I have to be an administrator, and if the changes don't work out, I can go delete the management pack and undo what I've just done. Hopefully I'm not testing in production, right? But if I am, I have great integration into my ITIL process because I don't have 5 people that are just willy-nilly making changes in my CMDB ad hoc. And CMDB automation can be just incorporated as part of the post-install validation process. So when that number 4 runbook that was provisioning the virtual machine, when it was done, what I could quite literally do is just go add another invoke runbook activity to my parent runbook to trigger the post-install CMDB insertion of all of this. I could do the same on a deprovisioning process, on a retirement process, to go remove the assets from Azure, and when they're gone, go remove the items from the CMDB.
We're not going to be able to get all of the information from that VM that's running in Azure that we would if it was on-prem. For instance, if we've not set up a VPN tunnel, Orchestrator is really pulling in the VM and its characteristics as almost not a black box in its entirety, but it's not going to reach in and understand what applications are inside that because we haven't got that agent in there.
That's an excellent point. What I'm really talking about is just sort of a poor man's version to do something very basic, right? As I'm exploring before I get into that, ideal scenario where I have a VPN gateway, be it a server 2012 RAS or an appliance, and I've made Azure an extension of my environment. And then, once I can get agents into the cloud, to leverage System Center's management capabilities, that's when I'm hitting the top of the mountain, really. And then lifecycle management becomes much more complete and much easier. He's kind of a half glass full guy at the end of the day, isn't he? But it's an excellent point. And that being said, we should probably have a discussion toward the end too around chargeback reporting. The chargeback was eluding me. We should talk about chargeback reporting because what we talked about today was a price sheet tied to a cloud, which was defined in Virtual Machine Manager, which price sheet, cloud, and Virtual Machine Manager means private cloud, right? So what do we do in Azure? So we'll want to have a chat about what happens there. So I want to jump over, just give you a quick how-to for creating an object in Service Manager. We've looked a bit at looking up objects, at getting an object, so to speak. Let's just look at creating something from scratch. So within the Service Manager integration pack for Orchestrator, there are a number of activities. One is get object, another is update object, another is create object. So what I love about this Service Manager pack, a lot of these have object in the name or template in the name. I have some integration packs in my console here, so we'll take a look at my Orchestrator Runbook Designer. I'm going to look over in my activities palette over here, and you'll see that I have a Service Manager area. I've got activities to create related objects, so I can actually add one object, one CI, as a related object to another. So I've got some pretty rich capabilities here to tie objects together. But what I'm going to show you is a very simple runbook that's sort of a foundation, kind of a launching pad to get you exploring into some of the possibilities. I have 2 activities. I have initialized data, which is going to collect three pieces of information. We're going to get the NetBIOS name of the machine, the NetBIOS domain, if I am domain joining, in fact, and the operating system version that I'm deploying. So just a very basic set of information about this computer. I could add things in there like IP address, etc., whatever you want. Let's drill into create object and look at what we have here. So create object is very universal in that it allows me to supply the connection to Service Manager here. I only have one Service Manager connection in my environment. But you notice for class, the ellipsis, the three little dots are out to the side. I can put whatever class I would like here. So I can have a runbook that in this case is going to create a Windows computer class. I could create virtual machine classes, cloud services, whatever classes I want to put out there. I can use this to create instances of those classes. So the Windows computer class is an existing class in the CMDB. All I am doing is adding a new computer to my CMDB. Now, why would I be doing this? Well, in this case, I'm deploying kind of a standalone virtual machine in Azure. I don't have any System Center agents there. It's not an Active Directory. It's a blind spot for me in terms of a deployed asset. Is this going to give me, chargeback reporting capability on Azure? No, it's giving me a modicum of visibility. It's giving me something that I can, put into a custom view in my Service Manager console to keep this insight and in my mind as an asset that I've deployed out here. So I'm just going to initiate this runbook using the runbook tester. Something I probably haven't said to our audience today, you want to be careful with the runbook tester as you're testing your runbooks, because it tests your runbooks except it tests them for real. So if you build a runbook that's designed to maybe do bulk delete in a SQL table, query database is one of my favorite activities that you can drag on the palette in Orchestrator, because it gives us a lot of integration capabilities with ODBC compliant databases. I can make calls into not only Microsoft ODBC components, but into Oracle or MySQL, insert database here. So what I'm going to do now is just plug the information into the initialized data parameter here, and I will create something. Let's say we've deployed a database for Matt.
It's very kind.
So this is the Matt McS VM. The OS version was Windows Server 2008 R2. Naturally, I'm going to be not doing this manually in a live environment. I'll be using that invoke runbook to pass in published data from my shared data bus area in my runbook. So I'm passing in dynamic values based on the decisions you made when you did your self-service provisioning. And let's say this has no domain, so I'm going to leave that empty. I'll hit OK. If I've supplied everything right, this is going to run step 1, step 2. It will add that object to the CMDB, and I'll be able to go look that up in Service Manager. Okay, so here's the name of the virtual machine. Now I didn't supply any name, so the display name is going to be a little funky there because there's no domain behind it. So I'm going to go back over to my Service Manager console. Have to make sure I sort of keep us grounded as to where we are. So I'm going to go back over to my CMDB, to my configuration items. I'm going to find my Windows computers, my all Windows computers view, and I'm going to see if I did in fact actually add this information to the CMDB successfully. And I'm really trying to use this as an example. I'm not trying to take you down a road of homemade integration here. I really think that ultimate scenario as you explore your hybrid cloud capabilities and get into a scenario where you find some use cases where tying Azure to your corporate environment with that VPN gateway, which is as simple as a Windows Server 2012 RAS server, is going to be a more sustainable strategy. But again, we don't all live in an ideal world, do we? So I have to sort of give you some foundation, from a technology perspective of how would I, if my situation is not ideal. So let's go back and just look at the CMDB and see if my Windows computer that I can use as an extra runbook here to drive assets into the CMDB is actually here. So I'm just back here. I did my search in all Windows computers, pasted in that name, and you see I actually even had the dot in there. I didn't bother putting in the DNS domain. The value of testing, right? So I want to make sure that I'm accounting for all of those potential variances in my process automation. But I've effectively added an object of the Windows computer type. although I didn't populate every potential property, right? I can actually open this up and have a look. And this isn't the only way I could do this. I could also do this with the CSV import wizard, which shows up down with the connectors. But this looks exactly like a Windows computer. I just don't have a lot of information in it here. It's just bare necessities. Now I have a sample that I can show you here. Let me just see where I put that critter quickly, and we'll switch over to. Well, I think it should be here. I may not have it here, and it may be deleted. I may have slept and decided it's gone, but I was relatively certain I had it in here. So I'm sorry I didn't have it here. I'm going to have to ask you to go back and watch day 1 because I don't have the sample to show you. But suffice it to say, we'll go look at the wizard quickly, which is really quite easy to navigate, to populate information in there. So actually, yeah, so here's something. Here's something I did with an odd file permission scenario. So the CSV import process requires 2 files. It requires a CSV file, comma separated value, and it requires what we call an XML format file. It tells Service Manager what the columns in your CSV file actually mean. So in this case, I've got 4 columns of file permissions, and I have an XML file that has 4 columns of explanation. So what I showed yesterday, what I showed in part 1 in Private Cloud was a list of computers we were bringing in from a completely external source that had no information, which is something we could put together in Azure PowerShell to bring out a list of computers and make this a much more efficient batch process, frankly. That example I showed you in Orchestrator is a possibility, but in terms of bulk processing for large numbers of updates, the CSV import option that we get here in the administration workspace in the connectors tab is in the connectors node is going to be very easy to deal with. So I'll right click on connectors in the administration workspace, and you'll notice that right below create connector is import from CSV. So I'm going to select that option, and when I select this option, it's going to pop up a little interface with only 2 options for me. Give me the XML format file, give me the data file. All I need to do is be smart enough to browse out to the folder where I created these. As I'm doing that, you may say to yourself, I am not an XML expert, nor am I. I am an IT pro just like you, and I found how to do these out on the various Microsoft TechNet blogs, where many people have put examples and even put some sample files for us out there to look at this process in detail. In fact, I leveraged one of those samples to bring a massive amount of mobile device data into the CMDB for an organization on a chance visit. I actually showed up to see a friend, and it turned out they were using Service Manager, and we used this import wizard in a few minutes' time to bring in a bunch of mobile phones in a spreadsheet they'd been managing for years. And the amazement on their faces to see this simple wizard do so much is pretty exciting. So,
and then you gave them an invoice.
Yeah, so in that case I didn't give them an invoice. Geez,
yep.
This would have been great.
That's an hour.
So now we have our XML format file, we have the data file here, and I'm just going to hit the import button that's going to drive this process. And what's going to happen here is the import process is going to execute before my eyes, and the results are going to be presented to me here in near real time. So I'm going to see how many of these were created in memory and committed to the database, and if I had some formatting problems, they will, some will potentially fail, right? So, and at the complex end of the scale, when we're bringing in a lot of data and sometimes bringing in some relationship type data, we can get into scenarios where maybe it's not perfect the first time, but you see that was a done deal pretty quickly. And incidentally, I told you that Service Manager is very smart in terms of lifecycle management. So if you bring in data, if you bring in information about computers that's already there, it's not going to create duplicates. It's going to look at the information and update your existing assets based on the key properties that it uses to do that, the name being one of them. So I wanted to quickly call out for you another little lifecycle management tip, and this was some pain I went through in my early time with Azure, and that was the process of destroying a virtual machine. So when I want to deprovision or retire a machine, so to speak, you'll see here I've just got a list of kind of the high-level order of operations. I'm going to remove the endpoints, the way that I connect into the virtual machine. remove the deployment, delete the disks, which then gives me the capability to start deleting what's within.
What is the deployment? Is that the VM itself?
Yeah.
If you were looking at that through the Azure interface?
Yeah, so the deployment is a slightly more abstract concept that's created as I'm deploying. So, the best way I can tell you to look at that is actually to create it when you create your service. Actually, name that deployment. Something your prefix with deployment, and see where that shows up in the UI, and you'll see the logical construct. There are a lot of constructs here that don't make a lot of sense to an IT pro that's familiar with Active Directory, with VMM, etc. We saw things like service label, computer label, DNS name. There were 5 or 6 different labels that seemingly relate to a computer, and maybe only one of those your end user actually cares about. So there are a lot of logical constructs in Azure to get familiar with. I'm not going to give you too much lip service there, simply because you're going to need hands-on to kind of land some of those more abstract concepts. But that was just kind of a rough order of deletion. Again, you want to get out to the Orchestrating Windows Azure Runbooks article, which has some sample Azure runbooks, both for provisioning and for retiring, and some of the other activities in between, out on the Building Clouds blog, which is aka.ms/building cloud. So I got it right that time.
Well,
I
was hoping you'd get that one right.
Yeah. So we weren't sure for a minute, but we did. But he did manage. So again, the benefits of our CMDB integration is we're going to get that lifecycle management capability there, and it's going to we can do all sorts of homemade work there to do something basic. But as we incorporate Azure into as an extension of our corporate environment and leverage our normal System Center management capabilities, we're going to have greater capability to make that a more automated, organic process. Now, one last little bit I did want to cover off was around the help me here. Chargeback reporting. Yes, I promise that English is my first language. You might not know it. It's been a long day for all of us, right? So chargeback reporting, as we looked at it earlier in our day, is really a private cloud-based solution. So in Azure, we have a whole different set of assets that we need to report on. You have some types of reporting out there, but at the end of the day, the common question is, how can I bring all of that into a single pane of glass? I'm going to tell you there are multiple partners amongst the System Center Alliance that build more sophisticated, more granularly configurable chargeback reporting. Now, Microsoft and a partner called CloudCruiser recently announced that they were doing some work for an integrated solution with Azure, and CloudCruiser already ties back to System Center. Its integration points are Service Manager and Ops Manager. So right now, that looks to be our best single pane of glass. And I will say, I encourage you to go out and look for all of your chargeback reporting options. CloudCruiser is just one Microsoft made the announcement with, and actually the alliance partner I have the most experience with on a out in the field on a per customer basis. So let's recap a few things we've talked about today. I'm actually going to stop talking and catch my breath for 30 seconds and let Matt tie a few things off.
And you need to catch your breath, because we have covered a huge amount of stuff around integrating System Center and some of the components like Opsman. We've looked at Orchestrator, we've looked at Service Manager, we've looked at VMM. There's a whole host of things. We've pulled in some PowerShell stuff there as well. Lots of different System Center components have come together in this day to look at the monitoring. So how we can not only monitor on-prem, but we can push that out and start to monitor Azure IaaS and Azure worker roles, web roles. We didn't show that today, but the management pack and the approach you take is very, very similar. We looked at chargeback, particularly, as Pete said, from more of a private cloud perspective initially, where you're tying those price sheets in Service Manager to specific clouds that you've built through VMM. And we've looked at how we then try to transition, easy for me to say, English is my first language, just like you, transition across to that hybrid cloud, bringing it into a view with App Controller, plugging it into Orchestrator so we can start to automate, bringing it in all of those different components together, pushing VMM templates up to Azure via App Controller, so we can start to have a more uniform approach to embracing that public cloud service and extending our own infrastructure that's running in our data centers out to that infinite capacity that is in the public data centers within the Azure environment. We looked at runbooks specifically around how we could use them with Azure and how we could start to integrate them, not just with deploying simple tasks, but doing some more complex stuff, some chaining some runbooks together to provide some modular, transferable runbooks to perform certain tasks. We looked at how we started to plug that into the CMDB, and that is key because then we gain a lot of visibility into not just the private cloud and the stuff that's running on-premise, but the stuff that's in Azure, the stuff that we want to, from maybe a cost perspective, if we let things run and sprawl out of control in Azure, it's not as if we're just wasting resource. We're actually paying for that resource on an hourly, on a minutely basis. So it's good to have a grasp and a leash on that kind of public cloud stuff as well from a monetary and a financial control perspective. And then we wrapped up with some lifecycle management and how that all links together. And it's been a completely well-packed day, and hopefully it's given you visibility across all of the different ways of how we plug into public cloud and private cloud together.
Yeah, well said. And if you weren't able to join us for day one, the recording will be up in a few days' time. We really appreciate the investment of your time. I know many of you are in a different time zone. It's relatively early in the evening over here in Seattle, but I know for many of you it's late at night or the middle of the night, and I salute you for your dedication. So I hope you move ahead, keep your feet on the ground, your head in the cloud, and use and learn System Center and Windows Server 2012.
So with that, we're going to close up. We want to thank you an incredible amount for spending the day with us. The recordings will be made available. So we've got all of the information you'll be able to watch and refer your colleagues onto and provide them with the wealth of information that Pete and Simon covered on day one and Pete and myself have covered today. So you'll have loads of opportunities to go into that information a little bit more deeply. There's loads of other courses on the MVA website, so if you've got colleagues and friends who you think will benefit from that, get them to sign up, get on the leaderboard, get them to get the points together. And what you'll that's important, that competitive edge.
We're going to make that a friendly competition.
Exactly. But there's a load of stuff on there. Please fill out the final polls, and please, your feedback is incredibly valuable because that can help us shape future deliveries of this kind of content with information that you will find more pertinent, more relevant. So with that, thank you again for your time. We really do appreciate it, and hopefully you've found it incredibly useful, and thanks to Pete and all of our helpers who've helped us with the Q&A as well. That's been incredibly valuable for us and hopefully for you as well. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks again, Pete.
Thanks, man.
And we will sign off and enjoy the rest of your morning, day, evening, night, and thanks again. Cheers.
Cheers.